Hi everyone, I'm Zach. I'm an author and I'm a gamer and I'm in my basement. Today I'm here to talk to you about the updated outlining process that I'm going to be using for Dragonfired versus what I used with Son of a Lich. If you've read anything about how I write, you know that I am a big proponent of outlining. I have lots of respect for so-called pantsers, people who can write by the seat of their pants and just sit down and then, bam, great story. Or bam, something worth editing, Those are really impressive skills. I don't have them. I have to know where I'm going, and if I don't, I honestly find it very paralyzing. It really slows my writing down. It doesn't just make it worse, it makes it slower when I can't say this is where the story's going to go, because honestly, a lot of times if I just let my characters do what they're going to do, what they would do would lead to an unsatisfying conclusion. So I really plan out my books, it's worked pretty well for me. I'm very happy with my product. My readers are very happy with my product. That's cool, but I am changing the way I do things. I just want to share it with you in case you're curious. So let's take a look. This right here is the outline of Son of a Lich. And it's more than the outline. This is actually, I'm working in Scrivener, and the beauty of Scrivener is that when you have an outline, you can drill down into any document in the outline, and it's just a document. So this is actually the prologue of the last draft that I handled in Scrivener. I have a folder for each chapter, and then for every kind of scene within the chapter, I wrote up, a little blurb here. So I'm looking, kind of up around this synopsis. It says, this was written so long ago, it said, the bad orc comes to petition Derek to be chief. So there's an orcish villain in Son of a Lich who isn't even named at this point. The bad guy comes. And then what I would do is I would keep track of the total number of words. And I set up a field here for perspective, and I never used it. I said, well, what perspective will this be written from? Because I have a lot of point of view characters, and let's keep track of point of view characters. But I didn't keep up with it. I'm like, yeah, I'll get there. And as I wrote them, it evolved. More chapters showed up. The book got bigger and bigger. I think that's totally fine. I think that's actually how outlining should go. You shouldn't be so rigid about this is what I set in stone 6 months ago, so I must write blah blah blah. You got to go where the book takes you to a degree. But an outline is there to give you kind of scaffolding. So if something bundles out, becomes bigger or smaller, then you can kind of cram it back into shape and say, okay, well, it still fits within the overall story. Or you can say, you got to rebuild the end, and re-scaffold it out. But you always know where you're going, which for me, again, is critical. So this is how I did things. Nothing wrong with it. Pretty good. Good result. Couple of things that could have been better, though. You can see here over on the notes area, this big yellow box that says notes. That would, right here where it says major revisions, this notes box, I would very often write very little there. And actually, when I went through my first outlining pass, these were all blank. And I would just save them for actual notes. I'm going to write a note about how I need to make some major revisions to this scene because I worked through it with my writing group, and they were like, your first scene is not what should be your first scene. And I said, oh, okay, so I gotta make some adjustments here. But it was really this paragraph out in the main outline that I had to work on, and these are just really vague, really vague. So I outlined this, and then I would hit these scenes months later, and I'd be like, why did I think that was a good idea? And how am I going to connect it to this thing? So an outline can grow, but I always had to make it grow because there wasn't enough detail in the outline, and it was driving me nuts. The other thing that I did that was, really bad is when I wrote Orconomics, I got that out to the beta readers, and I had one friend, and thank God for him, he just went through and said, your timing doesn't make sense. They get here way too fast. And I had to go through and look at the timing and say, that's right. I'm going to have to go through and plot. So for Son of a Lich, I actually reached a point where I realized I was headed down that road again. And so what I went back through and did is I would write the date and the time of every scene and then roughly where it occurred. And, because armies are moving around and stuff like that, and I would actually take my map and measure out, can they get there fast enough? And kind of do all the math. That exercise took a long time, and it happened after the first draft was about a third written. So, like just putting pause on writing for, a week or two to go through and do the calculus of where people are really was a killer for momentum, and really a bummer. And so between those two things, there are a few things that happened with the writing of Son of Lich that, I am glad they happened for the book. I wound up adding a bunch of extra material. I ended up lengthening the span kind of towards the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3. There was all kinds of structural changes that happened that I think ultimately led to a much stronger book, and I am glad they happened. But I am not happy that they happened the way they happened. And one of the things just as crushed me was these kind of, I need big structural changes because of the pacing changes that were necessary, because I was constantly restructuring this book as I went through it, because I had no idea what I meant when I first outlined it. Some of the descriptions were just too vague, like the orc bad guy, or Poldo meets Mrs. Herc while trying to steal trash from Boulder folk. He winds up putting her up in his apartment. There's clearly a lot of action that happens between those two sentences. It is clearly not there. So, like that is the core problem. Every time I would go to write a new scene, I'd be like, what was I thinking? And I could keep the overall structure of the book in my head, and I knew where people roughly needed to go and what their character arcs would be. But when I outlined this, I clearly had something specific in mind, and then when I got down to write it, it was not there anymore. So that's what I did. Let's move on to what I'm going to do. So this is my outline for Dragonfired, and it's a little bit different. I've kind of approached it in a different way, and the biggest difference is that now there's more data here in the notes. So these notes contain a more full picture of what's going on in the scene. And this is the prologue, so there's not a lot happening. It's just kind of a little suspense builder. But then, this next scene kind of talks about the major beats that Gorman is going to hit in the scene. So where they meet, where they talk. Some of these I'm not going to show to you, but they get pretty involved. Like they include specific lines of dialogue that need to be hit, or specific topics that need to be mentioned. So I really nailed down what points are going to come into the story. The other thing that you may have noticed is I have an in and an out. One of the things I know my readers really appreciate about my work is, because they tell me, is I try to make the transitions between scenes kind of funny or memorable or connected in some way, or, in this book especially, kind of further the story through those connections. So there's a couple moments coming up where people are going to be like, what? And the following scene will immediately add context and keep you going like, okay, I gotta keep reading, so that's kind of the intent, is to use these transitions in a way that seamlessly connect the book and keep the fun going. That takes a lot of planning, and a lot of time was spent last book. I'd say like, I gotta move this scene, and I'd unplug it, and then I'd put it back in somewhere else, and now I've got to figure out, how am I going to connect these two? How am I going to make these two work together? So I'm trying to kind of bake that in from the beginning and say, this is how these scenes flow together. And when I do have to move scenes, because I do have to move scenes in an outlining capacity, I can instantly just, I'm scrubbing out a couple sentences and think about it then. So putting the outline together is meant to solve a lot of these puzzles that really slowed me down in the writing and revision process of Son of a Lich, and hopefully give me better velocity here. We'll find out. So there's that. The other thing that I did is I moved all the metadata out. You can see, between the synopsis over here and the target word count over here, I have these different metadata fields where I actually have set it up so I can plan dates and locations and perspectives with the outline, because they are not supplemental information that I should be figuring out later. If you don't know who's telling the story and where they are and when they're telling it, you don't really know what's going on, so I have to make that a part of my outline. And while I'm at it, I'm baking in this additional metadata. You can see over here you have custom metadata like the location and stuff like that, but you can also add keywords. So I've got a whole list of keywords here that I can apply to anything, any scene, and I do to track things like where are characters showing up. Like this is a scene with Gorm Ingerson and Bert in it. But I also track kind of plot lines. Like they talk about how the economy is not doing so well in this opening scene over breakfast. So there's a financial calamity tag there. And then later on I can go in and I can look for the keyword financial calamity and I can see how I'm building that out and where it's going wrong. So that's where I'm at. Wish me luck. A couple things that would be really helpful. If you like this video, please like it in YouTube or on Facebook. Share it to people who think might be interested in it. But most importantly, comment on it and tell me, like, I like this video. I want to see more about how you write. Or if you don't, you can downvote it in YouTube and you can write me back and say, nobody cares how you outline. You just wasted a half hour of your time when you could have been outlining. Shut up and write, or make more movies about playing Hearthstone or whatever it is you want to see. So let me know what you think, and I'll keep writing.